Power on.
This episode of the Star Trek Update is dedicated to Greg Murphy. Welcome, Section 31 Agent. It's time for the Star Trek Update. And here's your host, Brian Sovryn.
The thriller that is Sovzilla here for you, and oh boy, this is just one of my favorite times of the month. Every single time when I consider that I get paid by the patrons, and thank you so much for wanting to be financially invested in what I do, but to get paid for talking about Star Trek. I'll take that. Sign me up. Thank you. It really is. It's just absolutely one of my favorite times of the month. And of course, the other favorite time, or one of my other favorite times, is when I get to do the Star Wars update. Of course, the Star Wars update, I do that with my co-host and dear friend, Robin Freebeard. And that's always just a fantastic time. That'll be coming out later this month. There is a reason that this Star Trek update is coming out a little earlier in the month, why it's coming out on December 11th specifically. And that is not because of any big news or anything, but this is in commemoration of 20 years. 20 years ago, on December 11th, 1998. Fuck. I don't like thinking about this. But that is the day that Star Trek Insurrection, the Next Generation film, the third Next Generation film, came out in theaters. And we're going to do a bit of a retrospective a little later on in the episode to talk about that. I have said many times, I mean, as far as the reason why I wanted to really commemorate this. I mean, a 20-year anniversary is something. Usually you wait for 25 or 50 and blah, blah, blah. Now, the way Hollywood operates, they never let a good solid decade go to waste, it seems. But anyway, we'll talk more about Insurrection later. But point being is Star Trek Insurrection, as I have said before, previous times on the Star Trek update, that's actually, as far as the Next Generation movies go, it's actually my favorite of the bunch. I know that is not a majority opinion. Most people instantly, pick First Contact, and I completely understand why. First Contact is an amazing film. I'm taking nothing away from it. But yeah, I love Star Trek Insurrection, and we'll talk more about why as we get into this episode. But we also have a lot of new reviews for new Star Trek content to get into in this episode, some of which, actually, there's some things that I was hoping to review that didn't end up coming out, that should be still coming out, but I don't know. I don't know when. Particularly, I am referencing the Deep Space Nine documentary, which is What We Leave Behind. I was really expecting that, and I pre-ordered it. They were saying it was going to come out in November. Obviously, we're at December 11th here. It did not. They did say back in August, I think it was Ira Stephen Burr, said, made a very strong statement that, oh yeah, it'll come out in 2018. So they got a couple weeks. We'll see. I mean, certainly I can be understanding of when you are trying to do a really, a passion project, which I think What We Leave Behind is, okay, the documentary. When you're doing a passion project like that, you run into delays. It happens. Believe me, I know better than anyone, exactly how that works. So if anything, we'll just bump it back to, we'll end up bumping it back to January when we will be reviewing some of the first few episodes of Star Trek Discovery, because that'll be picking up pretty quickly. I think, in the first or second week of January, we'll be back on back on the schedule with that. Can't wait for that. Very excited. Actually, we can open this up with a little bit of news about Star Trek Discovery. And this news comes from an interesting place. Well, first off, it comes from Anson Mount, who, of course, is playing Captain Pike, Captain Christopher Pike, the character originally from the very first couple hours of Star Trek that was, originally hadn't been aired, though it would be cut into pieces for season 1 episode of the original series called The Menagerie, part 1 and 2, the only two-parter the original series ever had, but it was originally part of The Cage. And Anson Mount, I think, looks fantastic. I'm really excited for his portrayal of Captain Kirk because he looks like a cross between Bruce Greenwood, who played Pike in the 2009 Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness, and he looks like Jeffrey Hunter, who, of course, played Kirk back in The Cage. He kind of has the eyes, I feel like, almost the eyes, not exactly the eyes, but almost the eyes of Jeffrey Hunter, but then he's got the overall hair and look more of Bruce Greenwood. So I'm really excited for that. Of course, Jeffrey Hunter would do other things, not just play Captain Pike, but he'd also play Jesus, which always blows my mind. But anyway, really excited about that. But Anson Mount, so there's this, I think it's the guys that made New Voyages, Star Trek New Voyages, kind of those fan films or the fan series, I guess you would call it. They in Ticonderoga, New York, beautiful area. As someone from upstate New York or who lived in upstate New York for a while, definitely a gorgeous area. They remade for New Voyages all of these original series sets, kind of similar to what Star Trek Continues did as well. New Voyages is, the acting's not exactly there. Impressively, they'd get a lot of, I guess we could call them legacy actors from Star Trek to be a part of it. But I mean, I don't think, if you had a choice between, okay, should I watch New Voyages or should I watch Star Trek Continues? Fucking watch Star Trek Continues. Like, Star Trek Continues is infinitely superior, and I don't mean any insult to what the guys at Star Trek New Voyages were doing. I mean, I think it's dynamite. Okay, but anyway, they have all these sets there, and they set everything up. What's the guy's name? James Calway or something like that. Anyway, they were having kind of a mini convention. They have conventions at these sets, where they rebuilt the original Enterprise, the bridge, transporter room, all this different stuff. They had to have put a ton of money into it because it looks perfect. It's amazing. They will have conventions like every August, and then they have little mini events. And they had a mini event recently, just in the past couple of weeks, where William Shatner and Anson Mount were guests. That's awesome. I mean, I know Shatner actually loves upstate New York because he does a lot of quarter horse work up there, racing and charity and all that. But for Anson Mount to show up, wow, bravo. So that's really cool. At some point, I need to go there. I need to go hit up Ticonderoga, New York. Maybe I'll go there in August for their upcoming convention. But regardless, when they were there, so Shatner, of course, was doing his thing, as was reported, but Anson Mount came out of nowhere and said, hey, guess what? We're also getting an extra episode for Star Trek Discovery Season 2. Which I think is interesting. I could have fun and speculate on why you would only get, why only get one more episode? So originally there was 13, now there's going to be 14 episodes for Season 2. I kind of feel like if you get an extra episode, well, all right, let's base it a little bit on fact. So originally, Season 1 of Discovery wasn't going to be as long as it was. I think, what did they put in order for a couple extra episodes? I think it's pretty clear those couple extra episodes, if I were to guess where those were put, they were put right smack in the middle of the Mirror Universe. Because there's points in the Mirror Universe story where the episodes feel a little disjointed as far as what's going on. And I think they wanted, okay, we're doing the Mirror Universe way too fast. Originally, maybe they were going to do 2 episodes, kind of like what Enterprise did, Star Trek Enterprise in Season 4 with In a Mirror Darkly. Oh, baby, are we going to talk about that a little bit later? You just wait. Or that's going to come up anyway. Anyway, I think they put those in for Mirror Universe episodes. Now, if you're only going to get one more episode, I'm going to guess that that's there to flesh out, fill in some storyline that just needs something a little bit extra. Okay. And hell, it might even be a Mirror Universe episode or some kind of return to the Mirror Universe. Admittedly, if they do that, I do hope that it sticks within the canon that Star Trek Discovery Succession, which was a 4-issue comic book series that continued the adventures of the Star Trek Discovery Mirror Universe characters. I do hope that they stick with that, within that. Which I know, my old buddy Brandon Braga, he would call that canonicity porn, and that used to annoy the fuck out of him. How much people cared in Star Trek about canonicity, because he would want to do so many different things. Maybe that would fuck with canon a bit, but regardless, I do hope that they stick with it, because that's what gives Star Trek its richness. And if you're trying to keep the fans connected to the rest of the richness that Star Trek provides, you got to rock with the canon. And season 1 of Discovery did a great job with that. I mean, let's be clear about that. But I think it did a good job of like constantly mentioning, Jonathan Archer. We'd get all kinds of references here and there to all these different things. Hell, there'd be something as simple as the K7 station from Trouble with Tribbles, right? Being on a view screen or something. I mean, it just lots of that sort of stuff is great, but let's have some internal canonicity getting developed within Discovery itself that takes advantage of what's going on in other mediums. Because right now, the comic books and the novels, or the short treks, which we'll review the latest one from December in just a minute, that's all we've got. As far as like for Discovery in between episodes. And we're not getting, this isn't the old days where we'd get 24, 26 episode seasons, or 22 to 26 episode seasons of Star Trek. We're lucky if we're getting 13. Now we're lucky that we're getting 14. But anyway, I don't know how excited to get about getting another episode. I mean, certainly that's news. But I feel like that really is probably just there just to flesh something out a little bit more. Not a bad thing, but, nothing to get too jazzed up about. Unless it's maybe, I don't know, maybe they had some kind of idea for where they want to go with season 3, and they need to create some kind of episode with connective tissue for that. That is certainly plausible as well. And speaking of that, I want to touch on this, and then there's a little something I want to bring up that to me honestly doesn't fucking matter, but I'll tell you what that is in a second here. It felt like originally when Brian Fuller was the head guy with Star Trek Discovery. Of course, Brian Fuller was such a major part of Star Trek for many, many years back, during the original 18-year glory run, right, of Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. But it sounded like he really had a serious multi-year plan. Obviously, that multi-year plan has been, I think it's obvious, it's been thrown out the window. There has been this Star Trek Discovery, I want to say back in August maybe, it ended up there is a lawsuit against CBS for plagiarism with Star Trek Discovery. And basically there's this guy out of Egypt who has been developing a game since at least 2014. Star Trek Discovery arguably didn't start production until like 2015, and we had pretty much no details up until, we don't know what the show was supposed to actually end up looking like. I think it changed dramatically just months before it was supposed to come out, because that's why they backed it up so far, right? Because they just changed kind of everything. Again, when Brian Fuller left and Aaron Harberts and Gretchen Berg were in charge, I think those two, I don't know what the fuck they had in mind, but what we ended up with was a solid season 1, but I really think they fucked some shit up. And of course, there's a reason they got fired in the first place. I don't know if this is related to that, because the news seems to be kind of similar. But anyway, this guy has made this game. It's not a Star Trek game. It's a science fiction game. And what's pretty amazing about it with this story, okay, again, it's pretty clear he was developing this way before Star Trek Discovery, was probably had a more well set plan, or looked anything like what would end up coming out in, I guess started in 2017. And in it, I mean, like the most damning part of it is that there are you have these giant tardigrades in it, not necessarily using a mycelial network, but that they transport you to other parts of the universe. Like they are the propulsion or the vessels that take you around the universe. And that does smack awfully hard of Ripper, right? From the first few episodes of Star Trek Discovery, when they find that giant tardigrade that can actually, traverse the mycelial network and makes the spore drive of the Discovery actually work. And there were some other things too. There were some other characters here and there that looked a lot like one of the characters looked like Michael Burnham. One of them looked like Tilly. One of them even looked like there appeared to be a gay couple, even kind of like Stamets and the Doctor, Dr. Culver. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Now, look, I don't believe in intellectual property. I don't believe in like this, copyright law. I think all that's bullshit. So whatever. But this is pretty damning stuff, in my opinion. It's not going to win. This guy in Egypt, this developer, he's not going to win. He's not going to have enough to really, I mean, I don't know how he's going to take on CBS. Who knows, maybe Disney's funding him to fuck with Star Trek because of all the shit going on in Star Wars. But it's been pretty quiet. I have to admit, it is kind of odd just how quiet everybody is about this lawsuit going on. I mean, maybe they're being quiet because it's a loser. Like you're not even within the paradigm of IP and copyright. There's just not this guy just doesn't have, as far as I can tell, this guy just does not have enough for it to be claimed as plagiarism. And you can think back to cases from the 80s with like E.T. and Spielberg, where Spielberg was getting sued and all that, and a lot of stuff was getting thrown out. I mean, I can't picture this winning. But it is, I mean, like, let's be clear here. The idea of tardigrades being what propels you around the galaxy, like, that is a very unique idea, or a very rare idea. Like, that's not something that just anybody would come up with, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, and who the hell knows how they'd even find out about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Harberts and Gretchen Berg did copy off of this guy's ideas or something. And because, I mean, they don't even look like science fiction people. Like, that's the thing. Whenever, I don't think I talked about this. I don't know if I got into this in last month's Star Trek update when I did the review of the season 1 Blu-ray. I don't think I brought this up, but I want to bring it now. It's kind of weird that After Trek, which was the show that would premiere after every new episode of Star Trek Discovery when it was on its initial run on CBS All Access. After Trek was like this interview show. Again, these get done for all kinds of shows. Walking Dead has them. Game of Thrones has them. Fuck, even these like 90 Day Fiancé and Married at First Sight shows have them. It's crazy. But anyway, After Trek, and initially I was okay with these things. I have a point I want to get to with Aaron Harberts about this. Initially, I was okay with these shows, and I was like, well, that's kind of fun, whatever. But now, especially after rewatching Discovery on Blu-ray and all that, I think After Trek's terrible. We don't know if we're going to get it back in season 2. There was talk that it would be, but it would be a very different animal. It better be a very different animal if it is going to come back. I was just wholly unimpressed. Not unimpressed. I wasn't necessarily impressed before, but like once you finally see the whole season and you watch it again as an entire season, I think After Trek actually hurt the show because you kept getting, like, you just get these little teases, but these teases would get no real payoff, and everything seemed like smoke and mirrors on there, and it didn't work. And I was surprised that After Trek was not included on the Blu-ray release, but maybe it wasn't included because CBS realized, that was a stinker. And if you actually went back, I mean, you can still go and watch them all on CBS All Access. I can't imagine that people would, but as far as I know, you still can go watch them. I think if you went back and watched them and lifted some of the quotes from Aaron Harberts and Gretchen Berg, that there'd be some inconsistency, some contradictions in what they said and what would actually happen in Discovery and all. It's just fucking weird. So anyway, I think that they were hurting things. And when they would talk on After Trek, they just seemed really, I don't think they were vague because they were trying to keep it a mystery. I think they were vague because they didn't have a fucking clue what they were talking about. And now it only comes off as annoying. I'm so glad that they're gone. I mean, I really, really am. They always rub me the wrong way. So could those two have like lifted this idea from this guy's game or something and said, oh yeah, let's have this tardigrade. Wow. I mean, who would have ever thought of that? Isn't that a genius idea by my part, Mr. Aaron Harberts, blah, blah, blah. I could see that happening. But again, this lawsuit's not going to go anywhere. We're going to talk about it. No, you know what? Let's do it. I know I said I was going to review the latest short trek, but we'll save that. Because speaking of lawsuits, all right, ironically, there's some irony here. It is interesting that so few people are talking about this lawsuit against CBS for plagiarism on Star Trek Discovery. One of the sites that wastes no time bringing up bringing up the tiniest tidbit of news about anything Star Trek. And again, understand that most websites, will talk about whatever franchise it happens to be. If it's IO9, comicbook.com, and within the Star Trek universe, if it's like TrekCore and TrekMovie.net and all that, like any little thing that they can make a story out of to just get you some clicks on their sites, they're going to do. Not because there's anything necessarily, earth-shattering going on with that, but just because they want the clicks on their sites, right? So it's bullshit. So for them not to run with like a really, really, in my opinion, hot story, like that they're getting sued is rather shocking. And in fact, even like TrekCore and Trek Movie or Trek News or Trek Movie, whatever, any of those sites, I haven't even seen them really talk about it. Almost nobody's talking about this lawsuit other than, and amazingly, there is a site called like plagiarism.com. They have the story. There's some other places that have the story, places that aren't necessarily associated, either A, that are clearly not associated with Hollywood in a very deep way, or B, that they're in a completely different like realm of the industry. Okay. That's odd. And to add on to that, CBS has now apparently lifted or come to some kind of agreement with the team behind Star Trek Axanar, which was a far more high profile, again, this was pre-Discovery, but a far more high profile fan production. Okay, that was, or independent production that was being done, and it looked great. And I mean, you had great actors involved. You had the late great Richard Hatch. You had the guy that played Martok, General Martok in it. I mean, you just had all these great actors. It looked phenomenal. You had Gary Graham, of course, to come back as Saval. I mean, just dynamite. Okay, this looked really, really awesome, and obviously, and it's all covering the story of the like there was that big battle that Garth of Izar was a part of. The Battle of Axanar. And obviously, CBS and Paramount were sweating. And it's the one time they could agree on something, and they went after Axanar, as hardcore as they fucking can. Now, it's all coming back. And here's the interesting thing with this. Okay, I'll tell you more about what Axanar is actually going to be coming out with. It's not as exciting. The interesting thing is that is getting reported on, that Axanar is getting lifted. And it's also, the really interesting part is that comicbook.com is talking about Star Trek Axanar coming back. Now, why is that interesting? Because, and not a lot of people know this, who owns comicbook.com? CBS. Right. Like, well, I mean, so this is totally a marketing play. I don't know. I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with the, with the lawsuit by the Egyptian developer, but regardless, this is interesting. This is finally happening. Of course, the guy from Axanar, or the team from Axanar, pretty much came out and said, look, we lost all these sets. Like, all the money's gone. We can't, there's nothing really left. So we're going to finish up Axanar, but it's going to be 2 30-minute, what they're going to do. So when Axanar first came out, was that 2014, something like that? They did a documentary, like this documentary style thing called Prelude to Axanar, which was actually really good. For what it is, but you only accepted it because you knew that, again, it was a prelude to Axanar, and we were going to eventually see this amazing independent film come out that probably would have been better than anything CBS could come up with because it was being done by fans. Okay, so what they're going to do now, so I mean, that's why we accepted Prelude to Axanar. But now what's Axanar is going to take shape as is 2 30-minute documentaries, again, in a similar style to Prelude to Axanar. Now, I'm not saying I'm not welcoming to that, but that's not what, we were all hoping for. Anybody that was backing Axanar or interested in that, we weren't. I mean, the documentary was cool. We're like, oh, all right, yeah, okay, you guys obviously can make stuff, look good. Let's get to the movie. To just get 2 more documentaries, I mean, it's better than nothing. And I guess I'm glad that things got cleared up between CBS, Paramount, and the Axanar team. But it's still fucking bullshit, what CBS did and all that. Yeah. But it's also bullshit that, comicbook.com and a lot of these other sites they're also willing to talk about Axanar, but they won't give, this other lawsuit the time of day. I mean, they're all bullshit, but I think that's shitty that's going on. And part of me wonders, again, I don't think that the lawsuit from the Egyptian developer is going to hold up in court. I just don't. But there's just not enough there. There isn't. I mean, you look at it and you go, yeah, that probably happened, but it's not enough to win in court. But, people should be talking about this and saying, hey, that's going on, but whatever. Anyway, so enough of that. But yeah, we're going to get Axanar. These probably won't be done till like 2020. I don't know how quickly. I mean, they'll make it all happen. They are bringing back some of the cast. Of course, sadly, someone who I considered a good friend, Richard Hatch, not the guy from Survivor, the real Richard Hatch from Battlestar Galactica. Unfortunately, he passed on. And he's not coming back, and what a shame. Fuck CBS for that, but and Paramount. So anyway, that's what's going on there. Just kind of all the legal la 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 la. That's it makes me sick even just talking about it. So whatever. Let's move on. Let's talk about some good shit, okay? And not that this is like really good shit, but something that's at least positive. So we got our third short trek. This just recently. It was on December 6th. I believe that was a Thursday that it aired. Why CBS All Access waits until like 9 p.m. Eastern at night to air these, I have no idea. I really don't grasp this. I don't know what's going on, but television's such a weird thing, or whatever counts as television today is such a weird animal. We might talk about that a little later as well. That you don't know, who knows what anybody's thinking. So, but anyway, it was called Birthright was the title of it, and this was entirely a story about Commander Saru, and it has to do with Saru on the Kelpian, on his Kelpian homeworld, his original homeworld, which is Kaminar, which in fact, actually in the Star Trek Discovery Season 2 trailer that we've had recently, or that came out, well, I guess maybe that was a month and a half ago, we see a flower from Kaminar in that. So, this episode, again, spoiler alerts, this episode, this short trek, which is, I think, the shortest of them all. It does clock in at right around 15 minutes as to where the others would do like 18 and 20 and so on. This might be a prelude. It's certainly a prequel to what happens in Star Trek Discovery as a whole. It's the first one to be that, but also it may be a prelude to some of what we're going to get in Season 2, because there are clear references to Kaminar within the trailer and the content we've seen for Season 2 so far. So this takes place, what was the year? Was it 2246? It takes place like 10 years before the first episode of Discovery, or the first couple episodes of Discovery, Vulcan Hello, or I guess, yeah, that would be the first one, is the Vulcan Hello. And it has to do with Saru questioning his life on Kaminar. Is this all there is? What's behind the pinholes of the sky of night? I mean, what's, what is this all, what does all of this mean? And you find out that the Kelpians are very religious people. And in fact, they sacrifice themselves regularly to a species that you don't get to see called the Baul. And the Baul, there's like this crystal that comes down. It actually looks very much like Logan's Run, kind of like during Renewal Day, where the Kelpians seem to willingly give themselves up. There's like this floating crystal that almost looks like something from the Preservers, which is a reference to, original series episode. And actually, we saw the Preserver monument, technology in one of the early episodes of Season 1 of Discovery as well. But anyway, I don't know that it's that. But there's this Baul, and pretty much like Kelpians will get around this crystalline structure, and then they just go up and like they're gone. And apparently they know that they're going to be food. Like they consider this just part of the circle of life. This is kind of weird. And this feels like a retcon. Like, I don't know that this is the original backstory behind Saru or behind the Kelpians. And granted, also, if you remember back in May, I guess this would have been maybe May of 2017, something like that. Or maybe it was earlier than that, where the original look of Saru looked nothing like what Doug Jones is putting on now. Looked nothing like that makeup. It was like a guy with a V-shaped head and had 10 eyes, literally 10 eyes. It was a very different thing. So whatever the idea was behind the Kelpians, it's probably changed a few times. So the whole thing that we learned throughout Season 1 and even in the book Fear Itself by James Swallow is that the Kelpians are, again, they are a prey species. They're not the predators on their planet. They're the prey. And you talk about all these ways that they evolved because they were prey. Now, either they've been prey to a multitude of species on Kaminar for millions of years, or what? But if they just get picked up like if they just get beamed up effectively by a more technologically advanced species like the Baul to space or wherever the fuck the Baul are, why did they need to evolve to run fast? Why did they need to evolve like the threat ganglia and all that? Like that didn't really make any sense. Like this did not. Overall, I guess what I'm saying to you is this story did not impress me. This was probably the weakest of the short treks out there. And I know they felt they wanted to do it. Again, partly it's probably a prelude to something that's going to happen in season 2, but also because apparently a lot of fans, and who knows what fans are real on the internet, but apparently a lot of fans really love the character of Commander Saru. So this is an olive branch to them saying, well, here you go. Here's some more Saru, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, Saru ends up finding some Baul technology and he uses it to pull off a communication, or like it's a communicator of some kind, and he ends up communicating with a nearby starship. Again, spoiler alerts, what you find out happening is that the person is, the ship that he's actually communicating with was this Baul communicator. And it's amazing in and of itself that the species that apparently has almost no technology is able to figure all that out. He is reaching out to the Shenzhou, but it's with a Lieutenant Philippa Georgiou who beams down to the planet to pick him up, and not with Captain Georgiou. But again, this takes place 10 years before what we see in Vulcan Hello and Battle of the Binary Stars. So it makes sense that she'd be a lieutenant. It didn't look like they did too much de-aging on Michelle Yeoh. Definitely Michelle Yeoh there. It looked good. It was believable that she was a lieutenant, that she was Lieutenant Georgiou and so on. But yeah, I mean, that seemed to be like kind of the surprise. I thought it was sort of weird in some of the fan circles that I will peek into sometimes. Everybody's like, oh, and we can't believe who picked up Saru. Like, well, I mean, the way that people were selling it, who saw it initially, I was expecting it wouldn't have made sense at the time, but it's like, because of it being like 2246 or whatever. What, did Captain Kirk get them? Was it Captain Pike? Was it Robert April? Like, who the fuck was it? Like they made it like it was this big deal. It being Philippa Georgiou is not a big deal. It's like, okay, so it's a character who's presently contracted and a major part of Discovery. Why is that a shock? But whatever. I could get into a whole other side tangent about how a lot of times I think a lot of fans are pretty fucking stupid. But whatever, I won't go there. So anyway, Saru ends up getting picked up by the Shenzhou, and he alone does that and just kind of disappears from his people, I guess. And he ends up joining Starfleet, and then we get to where we are in Star Trek Discovery, where he's the commander of the Discovery at this point. So, you don't really get a whole lot of Kelpian life. Not really. I mean, you see them fishing and things like this, but it's really not that impressive. And honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about it. And really, like the whole, Saru is like taking a stand against his Kelpian dad, saying, oh, I think there must be something more out there. It came off cheap. It really, really came off cheap. And I think it would have come off a lot stronger if we were dealing with Kelpians who were literally being hunted instead of Kelpians that just kind of gave themselves up, to sacrifice. Because it just kind of felt like the apple, and it's actually a little weird. While it's consistent for the Shenzhou because it makes it clear at the end, or Lieutenant Georgiou seems to make it very clear at the end that they're aware of the relationship between the Kelpians and the Baul. And of course, she talks about kind of the Prime Directive and everything, how, we can't interfere because you're pre-warp, but because you figure out how to contact us, of course, we had to do something. Like for Starfleet to just be okay with that, I get it that Spock, in the episode The Apple, the original series, where they run into a very similar thing where people are just kind of like giving themselves over to this machine, where Spock says people have the right to a way of life that works for them. This is very different. The Kelpians, or at least what we were to understand, is the Kelpians were being hunted, and they're almost being duped, and they're not really being handed over. It's not like in The Apple. In The Apple, the people on that planet were being handed over paradise. Like literally paradise. That is not what's going on here with the Kelpians, okay? and for Starfleet to somehow, oh yeah, we just let that happen. Yeah, that just I have a hard time believing that. And I want to know who the captain of the Shenzhou is, because whoever they are, they're a fucking asshole. This was off. This was definitely, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't good, and there's problems with it. It's a very problematic little piece of Star Trek. So this short trek, Birthright, I don't think I've given any of these any rankings or anything, and it's tough to rank something that's only like 15 minutes long. But as far as the three that we've gotten so far, this is easily the worst. Now, we are getting the fourth short trek. I want to say that's coming out. That's first week of January that we'll get that. Might even be like January 2nd or something. But that will have Harry Mudd in it. We know that now. That looked interesting. We'll see. I mean, Harry Mudd has been a great character, or a very interesting character throughout season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, so it'll be good to see more of him. I mean, I already wasn't excited about this story with Saru, because it really would have had to be something amazing, I think, for me to be excited about it and for me to really love it. As to where I very much enjoyed Calypso, and I very much enjoyed the Tilly episode. Of course, Mary Wiseman, I mean, it's just magic on the screen. And look, Doug Jones is a great actor. I'm not taking anything away from him. I'm just saying there just wasn't enough here. And there was too many things that didn't make sense that were set up in season 1 that just didn't flow with this. So yeah, Birthright, short trek, not impressed at all. In fact, quite the opposite. So, all right, why don't we get into another review, and then we do have some other news, little tidbits of news from CBS All Access as far as the Picard show, and they are just tidbits. But let's get into another review, and what I'm going to review now is actually, and I've been talking about this for a few months, is the Star Trek Prometheus novel trilogy. These novels are interesting. As far as being in America, they started in 2017 coming out, and the trilogy finally came to a head. I think November 28th was when the last book in the trilogy. The first book is Fire with Fire. The last book was In the Heart of Chaos. And so you have there's 3 books total, and that one came out November 28th, 2018. So just recently. Now, the unique thing about these books, there's a couple of unique things about them. One is that they were not published by Simon & Schuster. They were published by Titan Books, which is a European company that also handles the publishing of the Star Trek magazine, which is kind of the successor to the classic Star Trek Communicator magazine from back in the day. That, boy, I read through those issues nonstop. I fucking love that. But Star Trek magazine, nowhere near as impressive as Star Trek Communicator, in my opinion. So anyway, Titan Books is the one that released it, and originally, I think these books are actually from a couple years ago, not just 2017, but they were originally only published in German, okay? And they were not in English. They would end up getting translated and brought over for that. And maybe it's because of the fact that they were originally published in German that Titan Books was the publisher. I'm still very confused as to why that is, because with this entire trilogy of books, and the authors are, it's actually 2 authors. It's Christian Humberg and Bernd Perples. These books fit totally within the Simon & Schuster universe. In fact, if you don't know the Simon & Schuster relaunch universe of Star Trek, that, where it takes place in like the 2380s, or where there's the sequel books to Star Trek Enterprise and so on, which I actually really enjoy those, even though they do have their problems. All of them do. But, if you haven't read these books, the Prometheus trilogy is a great introduction to this universe that has really been created, that all takes place after Star Trek The Next Generation. Granted, this universe is probably going to be called all bullshit once the Picard show comes out. We kind of know the year of the Picard show. I think it's like the 2390s, but yeah, that's probably all going to get called bullshit. There's so many really wild storylines. Like there's the battle of with the Borg over Vulcan that happens in the Simon & Schuster novels, in the Star Trek novel universe. Again, that relaunched in 2006. There were plenty of novels before then too, but there's that. There's the Typhon Pact, which is like this alliance that gets created with the Breen and the Gorn and Cardassians, I think, and everything. After the Dominion War, there's a lot of stuff that happens within the Dominion War that you never knew happened on screen when the Dominion War was happening, like the Battle of Beta Z, where Beta Z ended up getting taken over by the Dominion and so on. There's a lot of these events that occur, or a lot of stories that have to do with Q, like the Q Continuum novels and everything, which these 3 books, okay, the Prometheus trilogy, all references that. So why Titan Books is the publisher when it is within the same universe, clearly, and the same events that have happened in the Simon & Schuster novels. I don't know. I have no idea why that's the case. But these are not standalone. They do. I mean, initially, when I first picked it up, I thought that they were going to be standalone. But as soon as they started mentioning the Typhon Pact, that alliance, then I was like, oh, well, these are in the same, they're in the relaunch novel universe. Like, okay, which is fine because I'm somewhat familiar. I haven't read all of those books, but I'm somewhat familiar with them. And like, I read a lot of the Titan books and the Vanguard books and so on. So I know some of the events that they're referencing, especially with like the Titan books. Like there's the character of Leonard James Axanar, who you might remember from the original series episode Friday's Child, who is still alive in this. He's well over 100 years old, but he's named after Leonard McCoy and James T. Kirk. He's a Capellan. I love the episode Friday's Child. I always thought that was a really fun episode. And so that character is a part of this. It's another thing that points at, of course, the Prometheus itself, which is what the trilogy is titled after, is now the Federation flagship, and the Prometheus is the USS Prometheus that we saw in the Voyager episode, where the Doctor ends up getting like transmitted, and the Romulans are trying to steal this really advanced battleship. And the Prometheus is a huge ship that can split into 3 other ships. It's really, really badass. It's a warship, which that's kind of weird that the flagship of the Federation is, according to these books anyway, the flagship of the Federation is a warship. That doesn't sit very well. But a lot of the technologies that get laid out in the relaunch novels are also present here. Quantum slipstream drives being put into Federation starships, which allows them to go significantly faster than warp drive. That's, all a part of the program here. And it has to do with this area of space called the Lambda Cluster with this different species that's there. It's cool. Like it's a who's who. It's an all-star affair. And this is one of the nice things with the novels is that clearly, like the authors here, just like many of the authors that do great work with Star Trek novels, Kirsten Byers, David Mack, and so on, they are Star Trek fans. And they are canon junkies, right? They love their canonicity, or like I said, what Brandon Braga would call canonicity porn. They love their canonicity, and they love referencing all that shit. Ambassador Spock is in this, and the whole story takes place in 2385, so significantly later, even though initially it begins in the 22nd century, or the 23rd century, the 23rd century with a Constitution-class ship, the USS Valiant, which is canon, but they kind of talk about what happened to it and everything. And this whole story is very much, this is Star Trek. The nice thing about this, so you get Loxana Troi, Captain Picard's in it briefly. You get all of these like brief appearances by just about, well, not every major character, but a lot of major characters that you could possibly want. You get a return to from them, okay, which was nice. And when you have 3 novels, you can kind of go for that scope. Not to say that there aren't problems with this being an entire trilogy. But where was I going with that? There's so much to say about these things, and we're talking about 3 books. 3 books, by the way, which I pretty much read in a weekend. Okay, I listened to the audiobooks. That was the other thing I was going to bring up, is that these did have really fairly well done audiobook versions, and they were done by Big Finish Productions, and they were narrated by Alec Newman, who did a fine job, has a bit of a British voice, whatever, that's fine. I think Big Finish might even be out of Britain. They're best known for doing the Doctor Who, a lot of Doctor Who shit. Like, they do a ton of Doctor Who shit, but they also do all of the Blake 7 like audiobooks, and they'll even publish, I think, the Blake 7 books, which I'm more than happy about, and I advertise them every time on Sovereign Tech Prime episodes. But Alec Newman, he gets, part of the problem with the audiobooks is there's some words that he pronounces like just dead wrong, and it's not because he's British. He's just pronouncing them dead wrong. Like when they're referencing the Tel Shiar, he says Tel Shire. And look, I have British friends. They don't say Tel Shire. They say Tel Shiar. Like they pronounce it right. There were some other words that it was kind of weird how he pronounced them. There was a point I was going to get to earlier, and I no need to pause it and go back. But anyway, I'll just keep reviewing these. A lot of references to all kinds of small things, which is what always makes the novels fun. Like there's references to the Takan Empire, like kind of the main villain in this. Oh, this is what I was going to get to. Okay, so the nice thing with novels, or with these books, is that this entire story really is it felt like Star Trek because it was commentating It was a moral story. It was commentating on our world today. And these are definitely books to come out of a Trump era. Okay. And they are commentary, I think, on Trump, because it's really about like this creature who is literally spreading hate throughout the, more or less the entire galaxy. Okay. And it's a creature it's a creature based off of a character from a great original series episode from season 3, which is Day of the Dove, where you have what ends up being called, the Beta 12A entity. So it's one of those. And so there's precedent for this. It's not like they just made it up to be a metaphor for Trump, for President Trump. They actually, they're using something within canon, but it's definitely getting into xenophobia and, racism and hatred and all that, because you have this entire race that's, saying, the Federation has to stop, with its expansion plans and everything. They're breaking up the harmony of the spheres and everything. And it's an interesting story, and it's kind of fun. The only thing is, it's way too long. This whole story should have been told inside of one book, even with all the great characters that take part in it. And Ambassador Spock is really great in it, and there's a lot of reference to things that happened in previous episodes of Star Trek and all that, and it puts it all together. It really weaves together the entire Star Trek narrative that we have that's been going on for, decades now. But it's way too long. The first book is pure setup. If you can get through the first book, the second book kind of starts to give you some answers, but you should have been given those answers, like the idea that this could be the Beta 12A entity. You should have gotten hints of that in the first one. If I had to wait, because the original publishing of the book was way back in 2017, if I had to wait from 2017 or, early 2017 to November of 2018, and I read as these came out, like that just would have been too far apart. You can't even remember what the fuck happened. So it's a more enjoyable when you're listening to them in the audiobook format and you're getting them all at once. And Big Finish finally came out with the last book, In the Heart of Chaos, just like last week. Okay. First week of December, they finally released that in audiobook. I had it pre-ordered months ago, but anyway, once it hit, I listened. Yeah. Again, the Star Trek novel universe is really going to, I think it's just going to fall apart. Okay. It's going to fall apart as soon as this Picard series drops, because all of the books that they're selling are taking place after Star Trek Voyager. Right, or the ones that are really selling take place after Star Trek Voyager. And we're already getting a lot of contradictions from other sources to anything that they're laying out with the Enterprise novels, which take place in the 22nd century, right, with the Earth-Romulan War and so on. We're getting a lot of contradictions with that from other sources. So, yeah, I feel kind of bad for Star Trek novels. Now, the Star Trek Discovery novels are still supposed to be canon, but everything else, Now, maybe that's why it's going to be with Titan Books, because Titan Books is going to take over the relaunch universe, and Simon & Schuster will just stick with in-universe and being, kind of the quasi-canon, and really it's canon, but the quasi-canon nature of what they're publishing, say, with Star Trek Discovery and probably with other series that are going to end up coming out. So, I really enjoyed it, and a lot of the characters are really cool. Like, there's a descendant of Captain Kirk. She's an engineer. She's really great, Jenna Kirk. The books are far more adult. There's reference to porn, to like Ryzian porn, from Ryza. That gets talked about, and how it's a genuine art form and all this. There's like such great shit in it. And I wish Star Trek would go in that direction, where it would be way, way more adult and explicitly adult. But I don't know if it's ever going to do that, but it's nice that the novels do. I'll give them that. They're enjoyable stories. How these guys, Christian Humberg, and Bernd Perpley's there, how they're able to put that much canon into 3 novels is pretty amazing. How they're able to reference that much, not just within what we saw on TV or what's in movies and TV episodes, but what happens in all the other novels is incredible. What a feat. It's really something. So, if you have free time for your ears and you want to listen to a great Star Trek production, these are probably, as far as audiobook production, Alec Newman does a great job. There's no sound effects or anything in it. I wish there was. Because I think we actually got some of that with, or at least some music. with the audiobooks that they release for Star Trek Discovery, which generally Simon & Schuster does not do audiobooks. The Star Trek Discovery books getting audiobooks is a rarity. And that's part of the reason I got excited about the Prometheus ones and why I even bought the audiobooks, was because I wanted Big Finish to know, do more Star Trek, right? Because I've had a fuck enough of you constantly doing Doctor Who, you know. I mean, I'm glad finally they came out with an announcement the other day. We're going to get more Blake 7 audio works in January of 2019. But shit, you know, it's just, they do great work there. I wish more of it would be Star Trek or just something. Yeah, I mean, they did Highlander books. They did the Stargate books. Those are great. I guess they don't sell. I don't know what it is with the fucking juggernaut that is Doctor Who, because somehow it's like they're coming out with a Doctor Who book like every week. It almost feels like, and it's new stuff. And they got to be putting down money because they're getting like the actors that have actually been in Doctor Who, or they're getting some kind of big name actors. I really wish they would do it with Star Trek. So that's part of the reason I was excited about Prometheus and I wanted to support it. Again, if you're interested in the relaunch novels and you want to get an introduction to it, especially via audiobooks so you can taste it and not spend so much time as actually reading an entire, physically reading an entire relaunch novel, this is a good way to go. And you could like go to Memory Beta and you could look up, all right, what's the Typhon Pact? What's this? I mean, there's great ideas that at some point I want to explore more of that are part of the relaunch novels. I mean, really great ideas. Like what was it, Uri from the Section 31 novels, the computer that ended up creating Starfleet and the Federation. Literally, this AI that did that. You find out did that. Oh man, I mean, great stories. Yeah, I'd love to see more of it. I mean, and it can be fun. It actually is. It was fun listening to it. And once you're into it and you're in deep, you're into the characters and everything. But at the same time, like these were way too long, and it really should have been. All of this could have just happened in one novel. It didn't need to be, spread out across an entire trilogy, nor did it need to go for really over a year. Where these books were released like over a year. That's just way too long for this. So I enjoyed it. Again, it's impressive to hear all that canonicity come together and to get a little more from some of the characters that you love. And the Prometheus is such a badass ship. And I mean, there's lots of great references, like there's a Delton crew person, the EMH on there that was played by Andy Dick, if you remember, makes a return and all that. All that stuff's really interesting, but goddamn. I don't know. I was hoping for a little something more, and I wouldn't have minded if this was really just in its own separate universe, and if it was, the Prometheus kind of going forward, and it didn't have anything to do with the Typhon Pact or whatever. It would have been fine if it was in another area of space, which is pretty much where this took place in. And maybe the hope was by the authors that way some of what they do could stick as canon. But yeah. I don't know. It just goes to show, unless it's the Discovery novels right now, the novels some of them are fun. I mean, there's been great ones over the years, what was it? Best Destiny, Prime Directive, Enterprise, Federation. The Shatner novels are amazing. I totally recommend reading the Shatner novels. They're too much fun. But unless you're at that like level, they're honestly, they're not that worth it. So yeah, the Prometheus novels, I mean, I want to see more from Big Finish to do Star Trek. I want to see more Star Trek novels getting turned into audiobooks to at least be able to enjoy them, and unabridged works at that. A lot of them do have audiobooks from over the years, but they're all abridged and you don't really get the full flavor of what's going on. I'd like more of that, but yeah, I don't know if we're going to get it. And honestly, the novel universe, I think, is going to have to shift with what's happening with the Picard series, which, speaking of the Picard series, just a little bit of news. Alex Kurtzman, who is the guy, he's pretty much the Rick Berman now of Star Trek. He came out and said that the Picard show is going to be a very contemplative show. It's going to have a different tone than Star Trek Discovery. I think we were all sort of expecting that when you have a much older Patrick Stewart. Also, it is going to be being filmed in Southern California, which it's been a while since Star Trek has been filmed, in in arguably the heart of Hollywood. But, I mean, okay. And that's where Patrick Stewart, I think, lives most of the time. So that's probably why it's happening there. But yeah, I mean, those are really the only details we got. They said where, Kurtzman was saying where Discovery is this, high impact action, go, 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 go. This is going to be a much slower series. And I'm intrigued to see what that ends up looking like. But we did get that, and we do know that it will start airing at the end of 2019, that the first episode at least should be airing by the end of 2019, which that's a pretty good release schedule. I'm okay with waiting for that. I mean, we're going to get season 2 of Discovery for a bit. We'll probably get a bunch more short treks. In fact, I think that's been confirmed as well, that there will be other short treks that won't even have to do with Discovery. I think that's been confirmed now. Probably would do some lead up to the Picard show, but great, I'll take that too. There was also some news. They were talking to Nick Meyer. I don't know if he's going to be able to go forward with this, but apparently they talked about what the show or maybe that trilogy of movies that he was working on. But that was going to be called, or the show at least was going to be called SETI Alpha 5, and it was literally going to be about Khan getting marooned, pre Star Trek 2. On SETI Alpha 5, which is what happens at the end of Space Seed. Hot damn, I hope they make that. I'd watch Khan all day long. I think that'd be phenomenal, and have his wife, MacGyver's there. Lieutenant MacGyver's, because, the Enterprise needs a 20th century historian for some reason. Or whatever she was. I love the episode Space Seed, and of course most people love Star Trek 2. So to get something in between that, I think that's a brilliant bit of canon to fill in. So maybe we'll still end up getting that. It didn't sound like we were, but Nick Meyer was able to talk about it. I'm guessing his ability to talk about it might be because it might be to generate some interest, for it to become a thing. So we'll see. So another little review before I want to talk a little errata after that, and then we'll get into our retrospective on Star Trek Insurrection, or at least my feelings on it. I mean, I've reviewed the movie before, actually a couple times. I think I reviewed it, but just to talk about it, what it meant in 1998 and so on, I think would be kind of fun. But these are what I want to review here next are a couple of books. These are a couple of reference books, which of course I think Star Trek really popularized. Like, I remember, was Franz, whatever his name was, the original Starfleet technical manual from the 70s. That might be the first science fiction, major independent science fiction publication of a reference guide for a fictional universe. I mean, not necessarily done by the author, the original author, because you could say, well, there's tons of reference guides for Lord of the Rings and they've been now for over 100 years or whatever. I don't know. not over 100 years, but you get my point. Yeah, you could say that, but I think that Star Trek really started this trend of making technical manuals for fictional starships or whatever, kind of becoming a thing. In fact, recently I saw Firefly came out with their own kind of encyclopedia. I really do think Star Trek started this trend. And these books are not done. This is not done by Simon & Schuster. This is not done by any of the usual suspects as far as technical manuals go. Usually Michael and Denise Okuda end up doing it, like they did the Star Trek Chronology, the Star Trek Encyclopedia, which had a new edition come out. What was that? A couple of years ago now, of course, which I have. A tremendous 2-volume work. I mean, it's amazing. I remember the original when the first Star Trek Encyclopedia came out back in, was it 94? Not a big, it was a big book, but not a big book. Now it's 2 fucking volumes. Which is amazing in and of itself. But these 2 books, well, it's 2 now. The first one came out in September. The second one came out in later November. And they're called Star Trek Shipyards. The first one is Star Trek Shipyards, Starfleet Ships 2151 to 2293. The next one is Star Trek Shipyards, Starfleet Ships 2294 to the future. Because that ends up covering, well, as you can guess, this is covering starships. That one ends up covering all the way up to the Enterprise J and the Aeon, the time ship, right? The Aeon. And of course, the USS Relativity, which I think is such a badass little ship. And it is little because as you go through these guides, they have ship comparison, charts, sizes, the different sizes. In fact, in one of them, they got it wrong. With the Prometheus, they said the Prometheus was smaller than the Defiant. That's a total misprint because the Prometheus is 400, just shy of 500 meters long, I think. And the Defiant's only about 180. And they said, I think that I think in the size chart, they say that the Prometheus is 140. And no, you guys got that way off. And you can go to the section about the Prometheus and it even tells you that it's, around 500 meters long, which is pretty huge for a Starfleet starship. So these are done by Eagle Moss. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So you get like size comparisons in this, and they give kind of some blueprints and technical breakdowns. These are done by Eagle Moss, which is the same company that does the actual, like the die-cast starships. It's a subscription service, but then they also have special editions, and one that they end up releasing in, that they release exclusively online and not just through a subscription service that you could sign up for through, say, Star Trek Magazine or something like that. I have quite a few of these. My collection seems to continue to grow. And we've announced, we've reported on news of ones that they release over time, over the past year on the Star Trek Update. But really, all they did was, so these little starships, and it depends. They're anywhere from 4 to, well, some of the bigger ones. They have like the XL line, which those run about like almost a foot long. Okay, so that's the scale of the ships that we're talking about. And they're not all metal. It says they're die-cast, but a good chunk of them are plastic, sometimes to their detriment. Anyway, each one of those little ships, when you get one, say you get, I don't know, I'll just look up here. Like there's the Gorn ship. There's actually the USS Prometheus. When you get them, they come with a little magazine that's about 10, maybe not even 10 pages, very small, but very not many pages, but a big magazine. And this is like a collector's magazine. You used to get this with all kinds of these sort of like collector style subscription services that have been around for decades. But the little magazine will tell you about the ship, maybe like what episode they're in, what happened in it. It'll give you all these other details. Some of it is actually unique details that you don't get anywhere else. Some of it comes from interviews with creators and designers like Doug Drexler and so on. But I mean, they really are very nice little magazines, and they're almost as worth it. They're not worth, I mean, these ships cost anywhere from, the smaller ones, which are the bulk of what I have, they cost around $20, maybe 18 to $22, depending. The larger ones can end up costing like $75. That's usually where they top out. Any of them come with some kind of magazine, right? And the magazines aren't worth $20, but the magazines are a very nice bonus, because you get really interesting information in that, especially about some ships. Like, in fact, there's the little model. I'm just looking up in the BDSM studios here of the Enterprise B. Now, in the magazine for the Enterprise B, which is supposed to be based on canon work, they have started releasing ship models for, that are out of the novels or out of the comic books, but most of them are things that appear in either the movies or the TV shows, and that's all. Again, they have kind of gotten into where they're doing some other stuff, and they do some concept ones as well. Like they'll do a concept version of the Enterprise C or a Voyager, or they released, and this is actually the first one I ever got from Eagle Moss, they did a special edition release of the Columbia class, which was supposed to be what the Enterprise NX-01 was going to end up getting refitted and upgraded to in season 5, if there was going to be a season 5 of Star Trek Enterprise. So they'll release those, but by and large they stick to the canon, and I think the magazines do as well. And they talk about how the Enterprise B was in 2329 or 2321, something like that, was lost with all, like they don't know what happened to it. It disappeared. I've never seen that. That's not in the encyclopedia. I've never seen that bit of info anywhere else. So that's interesting, right? I don't know if that's exactly canon, but that's interesting. And this is the thing too, is that in these little magazines, they will have information that sometimes stand in contrast to what Simon & Schuster is putting out in their relaunch novel universe, right? That we were just talking about with the Prometheus novels. Yeah, that the Prometheus novels are a part of, even though they're not done by Simon & Schuster. So sometimes there's contradictions there as far as that information goes. Anyway, these books, and there's going to be more of them. The next one I think comes out in May of 2019, and it has to do with the Klingon fleet. These books really are just compilations of all of those magazines, or at least all of the ones, like in this case, for the first volume, which is from 2151 to 2293. They put in most of the magazines for ships of that era, which is the Enterprise era in the original series. Okay. And that's all it is. Like, it's just a great way and these run, now, funny thing. So like the first one, okay, I ended up getting, this was back in September when it first came out of this year. I ended up getting for like $16, I think, or something like that. Now, the interesting thing is that they sold an edition that came with a little model, of course, to get you started with Eagle Moss, that came with a little model of the NCC 1701, the original series version of the original Enterprise, okay, from the TV show. And on Amazon, like if you go to Eagle Moss, that costs $50 to get that with the book and with the little ship, which is an okay price. And these books I think normally sell for like $30. But on Amazon, if you pre-ordered it, you got it for like $16. Same with the second edition. I think I might have even gotten that one for $13. I don't get it. I don't know how they can undersell it by that much. I mean, these are premium hardcover, full color, very glossy quality pages, or paper. I mean, they can easily sell for $30, no problem. So I'm kind of surprised that somehow Amazon undercuts like that with price. I just don't get it. I don't know how Eagle Moss doesn't make the money off, or I don't know what kind of money Eagle Moss makes off that. I don't know, or unless Eagle Moss just like sliced up a bunch of the copies of the magazine that they had laying around the office and they put them in these books and they put them out. I mean, I'm kind of baffled how this, how I can end up getting them for that price. But hey, I'm not complaining. But yeah, that's really all it is that, so if you've already personally been collecting these starships for a long time, and you're already in the subscription service with Eagle Moss, you really don't need these books because also, like, they don't have, while they have some of the Discovery ships, they didn't have a lot of the special edition ships that came out, and none of these have the Kelvin timeline in them either. In fact, one of my disappointments in it with particularly with the older one, the 2151 to 2293 book, I was really hoping they'd have the Franklin in there because I love the USS Franklin. I already have a model of it that came with the Blu-ray of Star Trek Beyond, so I don't want to buy the one from Eagle Moss just to get the magazine about it. But maybe at some point they'll come out with a book that's just all about the Kelvin timeline. I mean, like, it's a brilliant move. It's a brilliant strategy on Eagle Moss's part. They can just resell their, material they've already made as actual books, and they work and they're great and they're so much fun to read through. I mean, they really, really are. Which, like, honestly, in a lot of ways, what I always wanted the Star Trek Encyclopedia to be would just be about all the starships, because in some ways, that's what I love about Star Trek more than anything. Even more than the characters, are just the starships themselves. Like, I am totally obsessed with the starships. And if you are like me, I mean, these books are certainly for you. They're really great. If you can get them especially for like a discounted price on Amazon, I mean, they're totally worth getting your hands on. The information's great. Like I said, there's a couple flubs in there that they did on their own, and they know better, and they know better because in the other part of the book, they get it right, like with the size of the USS Prometheus. But yeah, just beautiful stuff and such interesting things to read about. The size charts are nice. Obviously, you don't get those normally with the magazines. So if you think that's worth it, then maybe. But you can even see that in like the Star Trek Encyclopedia, which you could buy. But there's really cool shit in this, and a lot of the information, the insider information, is pretty rare and unique. So do check these out. If I think of it, I'll put links in the show notes where you can pick them up. I do think they are worthwhile. Certainly one of the best things we've been talking about this whole episode, quite frankly. But, just talk about some other errata. I want to talk about a couple other things here. Speaking of like interviews. So with season 2 of Discovery coming up, I think this is worthwhile to talk about. And also, well, yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. Recently been rewatching some episodes of Star Trek on when you have CBS All Access, right? They have all of the Star Treks on there. Okay. So, you can just even if I have the Blu-rays, and I want to talk about that though, even if I have the Blu-rays or digital copies or whatever of all of them, which I do, certainly with the digital copies, I don't have like all the Blu-rays. That's a very expensive proposition. Okay. And they keep coming out with different sets. The Blu-ray situation is such a mess right now. I love Blu-rays, but anyway, that's a conversation for another time. Otherwise, I'll be doing this for 2 hours this month. But anyway, so we're checking out some of the episodes on CBS All Access, particularly some Next Generation episodes. And I think particularly it was the season 6 finale into season 7, which was Descent part 1 and 2, right? Where they deal with lore and the independent Borg and everything. The weirdest damn thing. And I've seen this before, and I've kind of talked about this before. So if you want to watch Star Trek, the original series on CBS All Access, and it makes sense. Look, if that's the home of Star Trek, you better have every fucking TV show on there, and you better be putting your best foot forward. Here's the problem. They have every TV show on there. They don't have every movie because they're owned by Paramount and not CBS yet. But they have every TV show. They don't put their best foot forward. Okay? They don't. The original series episodes are not the updated versions of that, and I think they should be. especially because when you're streaming, even though streaming doesn't give you the best quality at all times, you sure as hell don't want the least quality being done. I mean, they're not even doing like the special edition remasters. You know, it's one thing, okay, no, we want we don't want to, like, because you could say to me, all right, yeah, but I want to see it with the original effects. Okay, I don't want to see it with the updated effects that they did back in, what was that, in 03, 04 or something like that, whenever they did the updated effects for the original series. And like that were put out with the DVD release and everything, I think. Okay, I get you. You don't want to see that. Like, I can understand that argument. You're like the people that don't want to see the special editions of Star Wars. I understand. But like, why you wouldn't want to see the HD remasters is beyond me. Like, really. You know, why not see it in the best possible picture quality that you can? Even if you don't want to see the updated effects, fine. See it in the best picture quality that you can. And like when you buy the DVD or the Blu-rays of the original series, you get both versions. You get the one with the special or with the updated effects, but then, or you can just get the one with the old effects, but it's still an HD remaster. I think CBS just plays like they just rip the VHS and put that on there and have you watch it. And I think literally with Descent specifically that I was watching, and if you have CBS All Access, I want you to try this and you tell me. If you watch Descent Part 1, first off, it fucks up in a couple places, but if you watch it, it starts off with the fucking Paramount logo and the quality literally looks like from the VHS. Like there's ghosting effects, there's everything. It's so bad. It is undeniably, I think it's the VHS. Maybe it's the DVD, but I don't think so. And if it's the DVD, it's the original DVDs that were coming out back in 2000, 2001. Okay, those sets that were like $100 a pop. If that's even what it is. And I'm watching this on a 720p screen, right? So it's not like I'm seeing lower quality just because it's 1080p or something. You know, I'm not that big of a hop, skip, and a jump from 480p. And so, yeah, I don't know what the hell they did. And the funny thing is, though, but then when it gets to Descent Part 2, then it looks like something, you know, it looks like the HD remaster that's on the Blu-rays. So, like, the inconsistency of quality of what CBS All Access is offering just with the classic content of Star Trek is, I mean, that's really, really shitty. And it's not just that. Like we talked about when we were doing the Blu-ray review of Discovery, you find out just how much you're missing when you're watching it on a streaming service compared to what's on the Blu-ray. And you're missing a lot. Sound quality, visual quality. Even if you're not watching it on a 1080p screen, the difference between streaming and offline playing from a disc is night and day. And you could say, well, we're in growing pains. It's going to get better. It's going to get better. I don't know, and I don't think so. Because the other thing is that, like, I was checking out the Blu-rays for Star Trek Enterprise. Fuck, what a great presentation that is. If you can get your hands on those, you do that, okay? The documentaries that, you know, one of my major complaints with the Blu-ray release of Star Trek Discovery was the documentaries were wholly unimpressive. There just wasn't much going on there, okay? The documentaries available in the Enterprise Blu-ray set are amazing. And I mean, they're literally amazing. They are an education, you understand. They are an education in Hollywood. They are an education in the entertainment industry. I mean, you learn so much. Like, there's this great, it's like a 4-part documentary. It goes 2 hours on the last disc of the Star Trek Enterprise Blu-ray set, and it's called it's called Decommissioning Enterprise, like Gone Too Soon, Decommissioning Enterprise, or something like Before Her Time, Decommissioning Enterprise, I think is what it's called. And it's 4 parts, and there's so many things they talk about. Like, they talk about how Manny Cotto, and they're interviewing him right and left and everything that was going on. They interview Brandon Braga, they interview Rick Berman, and these guys are being so honest. Like, Brandon Braga saying, look, he's like, I got tired of Star Trek. I couldn't do it anymore. And I mean, and Rick Berman's talking about various things. He's like, I'm burning out. I'm doing this, you know, and Manny Cotto comes in. He's like, yeah, I wanted to, you know, really get in with the canon and everything, but our budget got cut in season 4 of Enterprise. And he said part of the reason that they were doing like these big story arcs, where it's like 3 episodes where you do one story or 2 episodes where you do one story, was to amortize the ability to build massive sets since you amortize them, since you're doing, you know, 2 episodes, you could spend the budget of 2 episodes on one story, or the budget of 3 episodes on one story. And so that's part of the reason that season 4 of Enterprise, even though it got chopped down as far as well, not length, but as far as like budget, budget constraints, like they really, really took a lot of money away from it. The reason it could still look so amazing and was so epic was because they did these major story arcs. And Brandon Braga even comes out, he says, I wish I had Manny Cotto earlier. I wish we thought about doing that earlier. A lot of that worked. There's so much stuff that they talk about that. I mean, it's amazing to see. And here's the rub, is that you don't get that kind of honesty. You don't get those kind of documentaries. You don't get any of that stuff on a streaming service. Not really. There's documentaries, sure, that you can watch about Discovery on CBS All Access, right? But they're nothing, and they're puff pieces, right? Like, I mean, they're simply advertising for a show that's currently running. And so you're never going to get an honest take on something that's running. And maybe you don't even want that. There's a chance you don't want that. Like Brandon Braga says, like during that one documentary, and that's just one of like, I think there's got to be hundreds of hours of extra content on the Blu-ray box set for Enterprise. It's fucking amazing what's available on that, especially compared to what you get with Discovery or any new show. But he even admits, he says, if you asked me back then, he says, I would have said something very different. He says, I'm glad that I'm doing this now, that I'm talking about this now 10 years later, because this set's from 2015. And, oh, man. Yeah. The streaming services, and they were talking about then how gauging TV and all this stuff was really shifting at the time with Star Trek Enterprise, because like how Battlestar Galactica on the Sci-Fi Channel was in its first year and it was becoming the big hot hit. And they're talking to Larry Nemesic on there, kind of a big player as far as a Star Trek fan goes. And Larry Nemesic says, he says, what people don't realize? Every episode of Star Trek Enterprise in season 4 was doing over 1 million viewers, more than 1 million viewers over Battlestar Galactica, but everybody was just going fucking gaga over Battlestar Galactica. And he's like that. He says, that's crazy. Like, why did Galactica, and it's just, for me, it's another reason to hate Battlestar Galactica. Like, why does Galactica get away with it? But Star Trek Enterprise, even though it's doing better numbers, has to get canned and doesn't get any fucking press from anyone. Such bullshit. So anyway, having all of these extra features and everything, it's so worth it. And they even bring up that they knew when the show was getting canceled, like Manny Cotto is talking about, he says, look, in season 4, we knew it was going to end. About halfway through, we kind of knew it was going to end. Halfway through production, not like in the year of airing. He said, really, there was no amount of numbers that could have saved it. And part of that was because UPN was merging with WB, which is now the CW, but they were merging. And so the network was going away. It's not like the show was doing bad. It was the highest rated show on the network. It's that literally the network was going away and the WB didn't know what to do with Star Trek. Okay. So that's what was going on there. But Manny Cotto had the foresight to know. He said, what we're doing, he's like, this is Star Trek. This is big stuff. What we're doing, what matters is like, even if it's not going to save the show now, it's going to sell the show in the future, because this is going to last forever. This is not just some run-of-the-mill show on NBC. This is something that's going to last forever. And I think he hit on something so key that I have been saying, or at least hinting at, for a good long while. And that is, I don't know that you can truly appreciate art when it's new, when it's in its day. Okay, there's that old saying, right? Genius is never respected in its time. I don't think art is respected in its time, because like everything around it is like, we were talking earlier about After Trek, and how that just ended up being like, that was a complete waste of an hour every time that I sat down to watch it. I mean, because it was bullshit. Like none of that had any bearing in reality on what was going to go on with Star Trek Discovery. Most of the documentaries and making specials on the Blu-ray set for Star Trek Discovery really had no bearing whatsoever on the show itself or what was really going on. And I even said that when I reviewed it last month on the Star Trek Update, is that there's nothing here, there's no meat on the bones here, okay, that's like telling me what's really going on with all this, all the interesting stuff. But then, you watch a set of a box set release of a TV show from 2005, that being Enterprise, you get a ton of meat on the bones, because now there's nothing to lose, right? Like, I mean, now, you're not worried about marketing, and you can be honest, and you can come out and you can have a retrospective, and you can look back and you could say, well, this is what I think, this is what was going on. This is the deal. This is this, and most people don't know, but this is what actually happened. You get to kind of 40-foot view it, right? And man, I don't think any streaming service is ever going to give this kind of shit, this kind of content the time of day. These kind of documentaries and retrospectives, or even like the episode commentaries that they get with the actors are fucking dynamite. Connor Trinneer and the guy that played Malcolm Reed and all that, are on it, and they're hilarious. When are we ever going to get that kind of stuff? You're not. Okay, it's only stuff that makes sense when you think that you're going to push, I don't know, a few 100,000 box sets into stores. And it's a pity, because that pretty much means if streaming is the future and people not owning hard copy is the future, we're losing this just incredible insight into art, which is as important as the art, in my opinion, is the insight of the creators behind it, of the people that help bring it to life. What a pity. We're going into, I think, entertainment-wise, we're already in. I mean, I think in general in life, now I'm a long-term optimist, don't misunderstand me. I say this all the time on Sovryn Tech. But we live in a dystopia. We live in a technological dystopia, and yes, we do, okay? Entertainment, we're sure as fuck living in an entertainment dystopia, okay? And this just drives the point home. It really does. We are living in an entertainment dystopia. I mean, it's not just about the bean counters and the money men and everything as far as in Hollywood. I mean, those were always a problem. Sometimes they weren't as much as a problem as they are now, and really all you can hope for is that a director and writers and actors get in there that just have passion for what they're doing, and they can slip in some really great shit, under the noses of the money men and the bean counters and whatnot. That's the best that you can hope for. And I think that's a bit of a dirty secret in entertainment, okay, when it becomes entertainment that is being done by, big media companies and so on. With independents like me, I can make whatever I want and do whatever I want, and I do it out of passion, and it shows. Okay, but then also, I can't do a full TV series or anything, right? No, I mean, maybe people can do retrospective books, that are independent, where they can interview the producers and everything, and those can kind of be out there, and those are great. Those have been around for a while, sure. But it's important to keep in mind that, like, I think you really can't know what's going on, and I don't know. Just checking out the special features on that Enterprise set, I'm just like, this kind of thing is dying. This kind of presentation is dying, and it didn't last for long. I think this is during a climax on a Sovryn Tech Prime episode where I said, or maybe it was during a Q&A, like DVDs. That was a genuine revolution in art. Like, there was really a revolution where you were releasing the movie again years later was as important as putting it out in theaters. And they tried to put, like, you got all this content, you got all this restoration that would happen and everything, all to try and make a buck off of a movie again. But you were making a buck off of a movie, say like with Cleopatra or something that was like 40, 50 years old, right? Or however old. At the time, I guess it would have been 30 or 40. And it was all kind of to do that. But like with streaming, that's killing off even that incentive to make money off of a re-release of something that's older. And that's what I think is a shame. Like, we're losing a sense of history in general, I think, but we're losing a sense of history as far as entertainment and so on. I mean, it's so fucking bad. And with everything getting remade, who cares about what came before, right? Because it's not as flashy as the new one and all that. It's depressing. I really think we're like in an entertainment dystopia, and it's a shame that everything is going more towards the streaming and everything, because, I mean, it's amazing what can get made because of streaming, but then at the same time, what's come before is getting ignored, and it's getting ignored hard, and what's come before is some of the best stuff ever made. And yeah, again, what a pity. Fortunately, Star Trek is big enough, I think, where it can kind of survive with some of this. But even then, it's bad. And in fact, a part of me saw parallels with what's going on with Discovery and Enterprise, where Enterprise was Voyager and Enterprise were trying to carry an entire network, that being UPN. Really, Discovery is trying to carry an entire network, that being CBS All Access, in this case, a streaming network. And that's a lot to put on a show's shoulders, to carry an entire fucking network. And so I'm worried that, this whole thing's just going to flounder, even though I understand that Netflix is the one footing the bill, right? Like there's that whole story that Netflix is actually paying for all this Star Trek and CBS isn't, but CBS is paying for some things as far as this goes. And it's all very much a risk. But in fact, they talked about that too in one of the documentaries on the Enterprise box set, where they were saying that, Gene Roddenberry with The Next Generation, he made sure networks didn't have control of the show. That's why he went with syndication with The Next Generation, is so that he had ultimate say and no one else did. And I think we lost that. I don't know. I feel bad for art. At the same time, the technology that allows for great art to get made has been democratized. And so if we can fund each other, which kind of happens to some degree through crowdfunding sometimes, great. Then I think great things can happen. But it's the great shit is just, and maybe people have known this for a while, but the great shit really is not going to keep coming out of, I don't think. I mean, I'm still excited for Star Trek in general, but the great shit is not going to come out of Hollywood. The great shit is not going to come out of the major media companies. The great shit's coming out of the, out of the indies, really. And, that's why, I think Axanar got sued and so on. I mean, because they knew that it was better than what they were doing. So yeah, the fans get left behind. So many people get left behind. It's so crazy. I totally recommend watching. If you can find that Decommissioning Enterprise, or Gone Before Her Time or whatever it is, Decommissioning Enterprise. If you can find that on YouTube or something, totally watch that. It's 2 hours. That is just, it's a masterclass. It's amazing. So anyway, okay. Moral of the story, streaming sucks. Okay. And hard copy is still the king. I mean, and just gives you so much. So, all right. We want to talk about Insurrection. I want to get into that, and this might end up going 2 hours now that I notice what time it is. But we're going to do it. So December 11th, 1998, 20 years ago to the day. Unfucking believable. I mean, literally unbelievable. Star Trek Insurrection comes out in theaters. Again, it's just unbelievable because it was 20 years ago. Coming off of really what maybe Into Dark, maybe the recent Kelvin Timeline films would be bigger, or a couple of them would be, but coming off of, at the time, the biggest Star Trek movie ever since Star Trek 4, which would be Star Trek 8, First Contact, Star Trek 9, or Star Trek Insurrection, very high expectations, and you end up getting a lot of the same team that would come on board, or that was part of First Contact, because they wanted lightning to strike twice. Okay. And that made total sense. And they probably felt like this is kind of a Star Trek 3, Star Trek 4 situation, where with Star Trek 3, you had, ironically, the first officer of the Enterprise, that being Spock, that being Leonard Nimoy, the actor, being the director for Star Trek 3. And then also, Star Trek 3 was kind of a hit. And so, which of course Star Trek 2 is a huge hit, but then Star Trek 4 being at the time, the highest grossing Star Trek film of its day, or for a long time until really First Contact, they brought back Leonard Nimoy. They brought back a lot of the same people for 3 and 4 to make sense. Now, while 8 and 9, First Contact and Insurrection didn't directly play off of each other as far as story like 3 and 4 did, you did end up with a very similar situation where the first officer of the Enterprise, E, in this case, that being, Commander Riker, Jonathan Frakes, is the director for First Contact. He then comes on, or stays on, to be the director for Insurrection. And I think Jonathan Frakes is a fantastic director. He's actually been directing some of the better episodes of Star Trek Discovery, and we knew that he has come back also for season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. He's directed a lot of Star Trek, and it's always been phenomenal stuff, just like LeVar Burton has as well, who played Geordi, of course. But you get also similar writers. You have Michael Piller, who is, serious Star Trek alumni, as big a deal as Ron Moore, Brandon Braga, Rick Berman. He's writing again, and I think he does a really, really solid job with this. Now, the contrast, this is the third movie in the Next Generation series. The contrast between this and the third movie in the original series movies, that being Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, are very strong. Okay. And there's a lot of similarities, and it might not be so crazy that I love this movie so much, because it does follow a lot of similar abstract themes to Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And as I've said before, while Star Trek 1 is actually Star Trek the Motion Picture from 79 is my favorite Star Trek movie, Star Trek 3 is right there. It's right there. And if anybody said, no, I think Star Trek 3 is the greatest Star Trek movie ever made, No argument for me. Like, I agree with you. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful, rugged film that doesn't get nearly enough credit because of its predecessor, Star Trek II, being such a, being the big hotness. I think the same is true for Star Trek Insurrection. People were expecting another spectacle like Star Trek First Contact, which you couldn't get. There's no villain that you could bring back bigger than the Borg. So it couldn't happen. All right, you weren't going to get Star Trek First Contact again. But what you do get with Star Trek Insurrection is an important thing to happen within Star Trek as a whole. So while in Star Trek II, you end off, we're going to the Wrath of Khan, you end off with this message of, this Vulcan proverb that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Which is ridiculous, but but okay. All right, we'll go with that, right? And of course, Spock dies. Spoiler alert. Maybe that's why they called the third one Search for Spock, right? You didn't know? No. So in Star Trek 3, so while you set that up, and Star Trek 2, and not that Roddenberry really did a lot of writing for Star Trek 2. A lot of that was Nick Meyer, and Robert Burnett, anyway, all that whole crew. There was a lot of other ideas kind of coming together that you would get within Star Trek that Star Trek 2 is really propagating. Star Trek 3 would take just about everything you think you know about Star Trek and turn it completely on its head. Fuck duty. Fuck this whole idea that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. In fact, Kirk gives the exact reverse, where he says, no. Sometimes the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. And hell yes. Star Trek 3 is such a renegade, rogue, individualistic film that Star Trek needs to make sure that we know that everybody in the 23rd, or when we get to Insurrection, the 24th century, are still fucking human. Okay, and they're still paying attention to the biological universals within themselves. Of course, it's important to recognize, does Star Trek have one ideology going for it? Not exactly, because you have so many different writers and all that. You're going to get different ideas, conflicting ideas often enough, and conflicting ideology, as much as Rick Berman might have tried to protect it back in the day. But anyway, so Star Trek 3 was really a reality check, I think, for Star Trek in general. To say that, no, you know what, the Federation isn't the end all be all, and so on. Star Trek Insurrection does the same damn thing. And it's great that it has the name Insurrection, because that's very much what goes on here. Is Picard says, no, the Federation isn't the end all be all. The Federation can be wrong. Humans are still imperfect. And this is really a case where, again, the plot in Star Trek Insurrection is you have this race, the Baku, who have eschewed technology, okay, but they have immortality. So the plot is that the Federation and this rogue group that you find out they're kind of related to, or they're very much related to the Baku, the Sona, they want this, key to immortality, and they want to spread it around the universe. Well, Insurrection is the same message as Star Trek 3, that the needs of the few or the one are greater than the needs of the many. Because wouldn't it be great for everybody to be immortal, just for like 400 people to die? Or to no longer be immortal, or something like that, or to be taken from their home? I think a lot of people would say, well, that's totally worthwhile. But no, it's not. The individual is the measure of all things. You don't just go taking away the rights, or not that there's rights, but you don't go taking away the human liberties or the liberties of the individual just so that everybody else, could have immortality or something like that. That's how much is on the line. I think a common argument against Insurrection is that it felt like a TV episode, and that it was a great TV episode. Like, it would have been an awesome two-parter if it was, running during the 7 seasons of The Next Generation. It just didn't feel like a movie. No, I think the biggest possible message that Star Trek can talk about was being laid on the line in Star Trek Insurrection. This is a big movie. It really is. And a lot of people also complain that the idea that the Baku's way of living without technology, a lot of people would say that's a slap to the face to what Roddenberry was envisioning, and that he would have never allowed this kind of thing to be. I disagree with you. First off, I think that kind of, the idea that the Federation allows for all kinds of ways of life to coexist with each other, right? Isn't that what Sisko says in Emissary in the first episode of Deep Space Nine? Like, we're here to coexist and learn. This is the ultimate proof that the Federation, or at least some parts of the Federation, like Picard, are willing to coexist with all lifestyles and just leave them alone. And this needed to happen. right? And this needed to be a message that, kind of like we were talking about earlier with Star Trek Prometheus, one of the plot lines is that there's this argument that the Federation is this like expansionist colonial, institution. The Baku and Star Trek Insurrection is proof that no, or at least Picard and obviously his crew and maybe most of the Federation, if they knew what the Admiral was really going for, that kind of is the villain, the Federation Admiral in that movie, would say, no, we're gonna allow these people to coexist, even though it is the antithesis of what we are. So it's important. Like, this is a message that has to get reiterated, is that the Federation's way is not the only way, because that seems to be what gets spread throughout Star Trek often enough. And I think it's important for that message not to be there. So Star Trek Insurrection is really that rogue Starfleet ship movie, just like Star Trek 3, that espouses individualism, espouses the importance of, standing up for the liberties of the individual and so on. And I know that's kind of a libertarian anarchist kind of push coming from me, who's an anarchist, but still it's there and it's important, and it needs to be said that, we're not, because other parts of Star Trek feel a little ugly, where the tanks are rolling into, very much espouse socialism or something. A lot of it feels like that. And so but you need these movies, you need these stories that push back against that fact. That no, we really do respect all ways of life. And we're not a bunch of, we're not the conquistadors. So really important stuff. I love that. And Picard kind of goes native, and hey, great. Like I don't know. I think it's a brilliant little film. And the whole idea of like going rogue, especially taking your starship and kind of going rogue against such a big body like the Federation, when you're a young person, like at the time I was 17, or let's see. Yeah, I would have been 17 when I saw it. That appeals to a teenage boy. You know what I mean? Like that really appeals to me. So I love it. This is a very rebellious film. Maybe that's why people don't like it. They don't like it when, like, maybe a lot of fans don't even like it when the boat is getting rocked against the Federation. I don't know. I think that needs to happen. I think that sort of stuff, there's a phrase for it, like continual disruption or something like that, constant disruption, to make sure that society can keep growing and getting better. That's a concept. And I think Star Trek Insurrection, with the proper name of Insurrection, is really all about that. But most people just missed it. They didn't see that that's what was going on, I think, with the film. I think some of the moments between Picard and Anij, his love interest of the Baku, are some of the sexiest and most romantic moments in Star Trek history. I thought it was a turn on when I was a teenager. I think it's still a turn on now. I think that the way that the Baku want to live, I often wonder. I mean, and Picard does a little self-analysis on this, and it's what makes the film so great, is that it's a self-analysis on what Star Trek has been espousing for, at that point, a long time, over a decade at that point, right? Because it was 98, Next Generation started in 87. I mean, you could say that it was a self-analysis on Star Trek's entire history, which would have been 30 years at the time. And I don't think that's unfair. And for Picard to say, is like, there are days when I think about, wanting to live like you. That's important. That's important to get that out there. That's important for Star Trek to criticize itself. In a very real way. And it feels good. Just like Star Trek 3 was a criticism against Star Trek itself, I think, that the Federation isn't perfect, or that friendship is more important than any government or any institution and so on. Those are things that need to be told. Those are things that need to be said. And I felt like the movie had a big enough scope and enough going for it, where I know people complain about the effects in it because they dropped ILM because they wanted to do it on the cheap. I don't think the effects hurt that movie at all. I really don't. At the time, I understand the argument, because at the time, like, CGI was still kind of a new thing, and if you had weaker CGI, that was held against you. Again, story is what matters, and I think the story was fantastic for Insurrection. So it really appealed to me at the time. The movie really appealed to me. It still appeals to me. It's still my favorite film, partly as far as the Next Generation movies go, because it is that pushback. It is that reality check on everything that's being put on you. I mean, in Star Trek, The Next Generation would do that sometimes, like with the episodes with Moriarty, when he sees the Starfleet officers, the security guards, come up to him. He's looking at Starfleet uniforms. He's like, oh, policemen. I'd recognize them in any century. You need to rib at the Federation, right? Because we're not perfect, and we're not perfect in the 24th century either. We might be better, but we're not perfect. And so anytime you can get in a good ribbing, I think that that's so necessary, so needed, and I think it's fun, and I think it's great to explore it, and to do it with romance. And, and Jerry Goldsmith's score in Insurrection is probably his best work. I know some people want to say First Contact or The Motion Picture was his best work. I don't know. That score in Insurrection by Jerry Goldsmith, my favorite composer, was absolutely stunning and beautiful. I mean, I just loved it. I loved it. So anyway, I guess I just want to say 20 years on, Star Trek doesn't do this enough, where it gives itself a gut check, and it still doesn't give itself a gut check. In fact, now when it does a gut check, it's like, oh, are we warriors or explorers? It's never about, wait, should the Federation even exist or not? Should it be challenged in its very, in its very existence? And that's what you got with Star Trek 3, and that's what you got with Star Trek Insurrection. And Picard is so badass when he puts on a leather jacket and he saddles up. You know what I mean? And he gets the gal. I fucking love it. I love that movie so much. And I would really, I don't know if the novels have ever gone back there. I would love to read that story, of people going to visiting the Baku, and maybe Picard stays there for all time. I would love for the Picard television series to end with him going back to the Briar Patch, where the Baku live, going back there to that planet, and he becomes immortal, and he de-ages and all that. I think that'd be a tremendous story to tell. I would love for that to happen. That'd be a great swan song for the life of Picard, and because you sort of get that with the Shatnerverse and Ashes of Eden and all that, even though it's not canon, but I would like to see that happen. I think Insurrection, and if that does happen, prediction, if that does happen, Insurrection is going to become one of the most important 2 hours of Star Trek ever made. And I couldn't be happier about it, because I think it's, as far as the movies go, it's not the best Next Generation out there, but as far as the movies go, I think it tops it. I think it tops the list. I get First Contact, I understand, but I just thought Insurrection was phenomenal. 20 years later, for it to still have ramifications on new Star Trek, I think that could be incredible if that ends up happening, and I hope it does. So anyway, I will wrap it up with that. If you haven't watched Insurrection in a while, I totally recommend that you check it out again. And it's one that you can just sit down and watch and get going. And the style of it's so great. I love those, the white dress uniforms, fantastic. It really is a very classy film. So check that out if you haven't in a while. I mean, it's been 20 years. It's time for a rewatch. So, all right, that's it for your Star Trek update. I have been talking for, well, we almost got to 2 hours here. I kind of made it a little briefer on my retrospective for Insurrection, but such a brilliant film. So we'll wrap it up, and I will see all of you on the other side. Plenty more Patreon content to come out this month. Don't you worry. I'll see you on the other side.